Serious prison workers of Reddit, have you ever met an ex-inmate of yours out of prison? If so, what happened? I was a correctional officer and sergeant for about 6 years. I left corrections and had been with the police for 14 years. I have encountered many inmates on the street while on and off duty. I never once had a problem. However, I was once bear hugged by an inmate who was happy to see me and tell me how well he was doing. I once had an inmate simply nod at me and acknowledge my presence and everything in between. I was young when I started, never had an issues to speak of inside, and gained a pretty high level of respect from the inmate population, system-wide. I was never assaulted, but I used quite a bit of force. It's prison, it happens. I once arrested a dude who had carjacked someone. I spotted the car and attempted to stop him. He stopped the car and fled on foot. Ordinarily, I'd drive as long as I could as he ran, but he stopped the stolen car in such a way that I couldn't maneuver my car around it. I simply jumped into the stolen car and drove that until I was able to get out on foot and run. Apparently, he recognized me and just surrendered. As I tackled him to the ground, he kept saying my last name, which was strange. Turns out, he was one of my inmate workers in the prison who would clean for me. When he saw it was me who was chasing him, he decided not to fight. Many lols were had. In South Texas. Was shopping with my wife and ran into a huge 6 feet 7 inches HPL member that me and a coworker had to take down due to his aggressiveness. All he did was shake my hand and asked how I was doing. Was honestly expecting shit to go down. Nice guy when he's not surrounded by his people that like to be asshats. I taught Jed Prep in a prison for about 6 years, and I saw a lot of inmates on the out. When I started, I lived next door to the halfway house, and used to see guys all the time, find out how they were doing and so on. I'm Facebook friends with a few guys. One in particular worked as my tar in class. I'd let him run a class every now and then and he was an excellent teacher. He's been out for several years and runs an alternative education program in his old neighborhood, helping dudes get their JED. We chat every now and then. He's doing great and really making a difference in the community. Former guard in TX here. Was filling my car with gas when I heard my last name being called. We wore name tags with our last name on them, so inmates could call us officer so and so. Ended up being a dude who was locked up free on parole. He walked towards me and we chit-chatted for a bit, shook hands and all. Wished him well, and he did the same for me. He said he always had respect for me because I was the same officer day in and day out every time I worked. They knew what they got with me, and I also showed respect to all the inmates, no matter what it was they did. We really had no way of knowing what they did to land in there, but some would share freely if you asked them. I honestly did not remember the guy because you deal with thousands of inmates. The only ones I honestly remember were the staff support inmates that help you out and you delegate menial jobs to them, etc. Janitorial type shit. Anyways, pretty uneventful encounter. Yeah. Part of my job involves teaching inmates, in minimum mod, to care for 6 retired rats, horses and the farm itself. It's a pretty great program. We also have dog training, vegetable gardening, and even beekeeping programs across the state, and the men usually end up getting jobs working with horses after their release. They get a Groom 1 certificate. 2 people come to mind. One guy got a job working for a well-known trainer in the area. The trainer has given jobs to a lot of people and is very well respected. Great guy. He let our graduate live in a trailer on his property, rent free, set him up with an old TV and PlayStation, had him eat dinner with the family, etc. The guy was a good guy, but had a lot of family problems he just couldn't get away from. One night his sister called and said she was in trouble, and he panicked and took the trainer's truck without asking to help her. Not anything nefarious, but a breach of trust, and he got fired. We saw him again helping him move his belongings out and try to find a job on the track. A lot of the guys we work with aren't necessarily terrible people, but have incredibly poor impulse control, and it gets them into trouble. Another guy is a better story. We had an open house at the barn for the public, and one of our graduates came back for it. He was working in a factory at that point, and had a steady place to live, had stayed clean, and so on. The horses loved him, and clearly remembered him, as much as horses can. He was very open about his history with our visitors and most respected him. One thing that was depressing was that he had real trouble trying to get jobs with horses at some places, like vet clinics, rescues, where he would have had to administer drugs to the horses because he had a drug conviction. This guy was like a goddamn horse magician and would have been great at those jobs. I understand the caution, but it just sucks seeing the trouble people have after release getting housing, jobs, and fair treatment. We can teach them job skills and educate them and get them started, but a lot of the time they just run into brick walls on the outside. Nothing too dramatic here. I was a nurse practitioner for our county jail for a couple years. A few months ago I was drinking at a dive bar in the rougher side of town with friends, and a man came up to me and said I had been his provider there and thanked me for taking care of him. Only once so far. I was doing hospital coverage and was sitting in the lobby of the hospital with another officer waiting a few minutes before we went up and relieved day shift. Someone got off the elevator and said, "Oh man, prison name brings guys down here. I can't believe I finally saw one of you guys on the outs." He continued walking with whoever he was with. I have no clue who he was. He may not have even recognized us if we hadn't been in uniform. I was a co for a brief period of time and got my brother a job there just out of high school for an even shorter period of time. He hated working in the prison. A while later he tells me about this weird girl who added him on Facebook and is sending creepy messages. I looked her up and it turns out one of the former inmates was stalking him. I made him delete and block her immediately and warned him again about adding strangers. He'd been there so briefly he didn't recognize her name, though she'd been a problematic inmate who I remembered distinctly for harassing him when he'd started working there. I always kept an eye out because it's a lot easier in a women's facility for them to file suit against male officers, and I didn't want his Navy getting him in trouble. I was a correctional officer from 2003 to 2010. In early 2005 I switched from cable to direct, and one of the two installers that came to my house was a former inmate. He didn't recognize me at first, but I could tell he had placed me by the end of the visit. Nothing bad came of it. He was an okay guy, but we had a policy that said we had to report encounters like that, just in case of any future issues. After I reported it, that was the end of it, though I think he came back to my jail later on an unrelated charge. I taught yoga to inmates for a few years. One guy was being released, and on the morning of the first thing he did was renew his wedding vows with his wife at a nearby park. He invited me and a few of the other yoga teachers. All the inmates I taught to were very friendly, especially given it was a high security prison. It is rare for an inmate to have a wife and family waiting for them after a 30-year imprisonment. CO for 5 years. Made an account to make this post. Ran into a couple ex-inmates in my time. The one that stands out the most is a dude I had in the lockdown unit. Maybe 3 to 4 days after his release, my wife and I were at a Kinkus in town getting something or another printed. Had the brand new baby with us in a car seat at my feet. So I'm standing in the store, waiting for wife, and I happen to see Mr. just released across the store at about the same time he sees me. He looks at his very large friend, seriously, 6 feet 3 inches or so, 270, 300 pounds, and they head my way with not happy looks. Mr. just released knew me pretty well in the lockdown unit. Didn't like me. I gave him a hard time because the other inmates in the unit would pressure him to do stuff to get at us, throw trash on the tier, yell mean and hurtful things, just generally be a butthead, and myself and my partner would search his house, take his Cadillac, a string with a weight attached, guys throw him out on the tier, and try to hook it to another guy's line, then pull it in, and they can pass contraband that way, anything that fits under the door, and one time even got him to write an essay about following rules in exchange for some coffee he got from another dude that we took, a major write-up, trading and bartering, and possession of contraband, but you can't always solve problems with write-ups alone. Never did anything illegal or unethical to this dude, or any others. I'm not that kind of officer. I digress. Anyways, Mr. just released and large friend head my way with not happy looks. I don't know what to expect, but the hairs are standing up. So I turn to face him. At the time I open carried my firearm, legal in my state, but now I conceal carry anyways, and they saw it after I turned towards them. Not happy looks changed to big smiles and friendly faces real quick. Large friend even makes a comment about gun and the baby. I cheers mister. Just released for getting free and tell him to stay out of trouble, and we go our separate ways. Scary day. All in my head? Maybe. Did open carry save me? Maybe. Don't know and don't care. Ran into lots of others. Young dude cussing me out at a gas station from the driver's seat of his mom's minivan. She was in the passenger seat, yelling at him to just get gas in her car and go. Another dude just said hi and smiled. Both ends of the spectrum, about as many on both sides. Oddly enough, dudes who broke rules, got busted while in for whatever, they were always the ones who would yell and cuss and flip me off. Other guys that stayed cool inside, they would be the ones who smile and wave. One guy even said prison was the best time of his life. It's not my fault I have to do my job and search your house, take your stuff that's been altered, give you write-ups for tattoos, etc. But some sure do take it personally. I worked in a prison for 26 years, and I met ex-inmates outside a prison a lot. Still do. Most of them stop and tell me how good they are doing, and what line of work they are in now. Just a month ago, I was walking into the ice cream store and an ex-inmate driving by saw me and pulled over and got out of the car to talk to me a while. I always treated the inmates like adults and they knew what I expected of them. They knew that if they broke the rules and I found out, I would hold them accountable. They also knew that if they conducted themselves like adults I would not come around trying to find some gotcha rule violation. Never had to fight anyone in prison and all the guys I've run into on the outside have been smiling when they are talking to me. I think it worked out. Forensic psychiatry psychologist here. I once went canoeing, and there was a group of big bulky tattooed guys who looked to be right wing and most likely were starting a route next to my group of friends. One of them was an ex-patient who had murdered his drinking buddy and carefully cleaned the flat for hours after. He has been working in a janitor service for about 2 years now, and is still sober as far as I know. I just discreetly said hello, and he discreetly said hello and none of my friends noticed. Another ex-patient who had killed his wife sold me a fish sandwich a while ago, not sure if he still does that. It happens now and then but it isn't really exciting to be honest. Probably late to reply, but oh well. I've had 2 so far. The first was like many others here, an inmate recognized me at a gas station and shook my hand. I worked in the education department after 5 years working in general population, where they train inmates in different trades. Welding is fairly popular, and they can earn a bachelor's degree. This person in particular was a graduate, and from what I gathered after our chat had gotten his life together, and was doing well. The next was on Christmas actually. My parents came to visit, but I was still at work. After getting off I picked up my wife and we all planned to eat dinner at Denny's. My wife and I arrived first, found a table, and she went to the bathroom real quick. I was still in uniform, sitting alone at the table, when I noticed this guy staring at me. I didn't recognize him, but I did recognize his tattoos. Most of them were Tango Blast. He gave me the stink eye the entire time and I just looked right back at him, until my wife came back. He left shortly after. I'm not entirely certain why he would be angry with me, or it was probably just the uniform. I had a decent reputation in prison that was built with respect, other than the occasional knucklehead. I never really lost sleep over it however.